Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, Gonna Segregate the Bathroom? Okay, say goodbye to your toilet. Mandatory, not me but my dad. He's been a plumber since was 13, he's in his mid-60s now, he was in his late 40s when this happened. On to the story. My dad was working with a contractor on a residential remodel. Oftentimes one of the responsibilities of the plumber is to supply a temporary job toilet so that employees have a place to use the bathroom. About a week after he installed the job toilet, he came back to find a lock on it. He asked the foreman about it and the foreman said, "We've been having issues with people leaving the bathroom stinky, dirty, so we're limiting the people who have access, but I made a key for you, here." Well, my dad began to notice something. Every white person on the job site had a key and not a single Hispanic person had one. This rubbed him the wrong way, so he came up with a plan. He dicked around at the job site until the foreman went home. "Make sure you lock up when you're done, all that stuff." He did lock up, but not before he removed the toilet, threw it on his truck and took it home. A few days later he showed back up to the job site, and another job site toilet had been installed. The kicker, it was my dad's toilet that he had installed at another job for the same contractor, so he took that one as well. The foreman was not pleased to say the least, so he called his boss, the contractor, who called my dad, understandably angry that not one, but two of his jobs were without a toilet. My dad says, "I think me, you and foreman all need to sit down and have a meeting." So they set up a meeting. My dad sits down and explains the situation and says, "My toilets ain't gonna be used for no segregated bathrooms." Well, as it turns out, the contractor had no idea what the foreman was up to, and he didn't know that the foreman had robbed a toilet from another job that he wasn't managing. Apparently the look he gave the foreman was priceless. He told my dad that there won't be any more problems of this sort, and the foreman got taken off of all of my dad's jobs and fired shortly thereafter. My dad reinstalled the toilets once the locks had been taken off of the door. Next one is titled, Homophobic Parents Made My Life Hell for 2 months, so I gave them a taste of their own medicine. Background. So back when I was 15, I had a father, who we'll call Deadbeat Joe. Deadbeat Joe was the stereotypical deadbeat father, as he almost never contacted me of his own volition, and he resisted paying my mother child support whenever he could because he hated her as she left him and took his baby away from him, so he took it out on me, his words not mine. My mother, being the saint she was, never talked bad about him and tried to endorse a relationship between us throughout my entire childhood. I did love Deadbeat Joe and would often want to spend time with him, but to no avail because he was always busy getting his dick wet with some rather questionable women, so I was basically forgotten about by him until the few occasions when he realized he remembered that he did have an older son. Because of that, I was raised by my mother and my stepfather, who I call Dad. They really loved, and still do love me, and they worked their butts off to make sure that I was well cared and provided for. Unfortunately, me and my family had to move away to another state when I was 12, which meant that my parents ended up buying a house which we moved into. Now, something to mention, up to this point we were very poor and my parents ended up buying a house after getting a great deal for it. However, the house was and is very poor quality and my parents didn't know that, so we ended up basically getting scammed. My mother lost her job and over time we ended up becoming so poor that we ended up having to rely on food banks to supply us with the food necessary to survive. Luckily, or rather unluckily, Deadbeat Joe and his new wife, who we'll call Chris, said that they'd take me in and that they had a good, decent quality of life. Because to my mother, Deadbeat Joe didn't really seem like the type of guy who would lie about something that big, so despite my objections, I hated Deadbeat Joe. By this point, I went to go live with Deadbeat Joe and Chris plus their kids due to the fact that my real parents were about to lose our home at the time and they didn't want me to be homeless along with them. At first they were very welcoming, but after a few weeks things started to change. Both Chris and Deadbeat Joe had lied and they were just as poor as my parents were. Over time, Chris had started to show the volatile side of herself and Deadbeat Joe found out I was gay, which was a problem due to the fact that he was very Christian. They both really hated how I was LGBT despite claiming otherwise, as Deadbeat Joe felt that I needed mental help because he felt that being gay was an illness. They tried to force me to conform to their beliefs that being gay was wrong, but I refused, which made them very angry. Chris also ended up just being horrible and manipulative to me on a regular basis, as she would do things like set up a schedule for the time of when as kids could do certain things, refuse to let me go to school for no good reason, threatened to isolate me from her entire family if I didn't do what she wanted me to, etc. Due to all of this, it caused me a lot of stress and anxiety over the 2 months I stayed there, and I would cry a lot in the corner of my room, wishing that the fuses that kept breaking would set the house on fire and take me with it. It built up a lot of anger and resentment within me and all of the things that Chris and Deadbeat Joe would do and say to me. After a while, the hostility in the house built up, and I would eventually be accused of being a pedophile who wanted to molest my brothers because Chris said that someone looked up child porn on her cell phone. Deadbeat Joe ended up taking away my phone and threatening me with knives, which culminated to me taking my phone back and running away to hide in the bushes outside of the trailer park we lived in. The cops came, my parents manipulated the situation to make it seem like I was a terrible child, and they left. The next week was a living hell afterwards, as Chris and Deadbeat Joe kept trying to get a confession out of me and kept threatening me, but I held my ground and was able to leave their house and move back in with my parents. By this point, I was seething with rage, but I didn't do anything to them as I wanted to move on. However, a month after I left her house, I remembered the smug face Chris made throughout the week she kept me a prisoner in her house and kept trying to ruin my life. I decided that I hated her too much to not retaliate against her and her husband. So that's what I ended up doing. The revenge. I decided that I would sign Chris up for all the spam, junk mail I could find using the information I could find online and on the school directory of the school she worked at. Looking to hear the sacred word of Scientology? Click. Want to hear about our shitty products that will fall apart after one use? Click. Want to see some hot sexy women get it on with each other? Click, click, click. Next, I decided to send Chris' family some recordings I took of some of the things that she would say to me. During my stay at Chris's house, I had recorded the things that she was saying to me, so I had evidence to show my parents that she was abusing me. I ended up sending those recordings to all of her close friends and family before blocking them. They were very bad, so it wouldn't have surprised me if some of them ended up distancing themselves from her after listening to it. Lastly, I decided that I would continue to make Deadbeat Joe pay my mother for what he owed her in child support. I was originally going to ask my real dad to adopt me, but after learning of how much money Deadbeat Joe had to send my mother, around $1,200 per month, I did the math and concluded out of spite that I would let my mother keep on milking him for what he was worth until I turned 18. It's going to be quite a bit of time before I become an adult too, as currently I am 16, so by the time I have turned 18, DJ will have to legally pay my mother $25,000 over the next few years of my life, which is definitely not something to sniff at. Resolution. I never heard back from my evil parents after I carried out my revenge against them, so I don't really know how their immediate reaction towards what I'd done. However, after going back to the school directory to see if any changes were made to it, I discovered that almost all of the teachers' info was scrubbed from the site and my stepmother name was nowhere to be found. I connected the dots and it made me realize that I had caused an entire site-wide change, and the reason why I'd never heard back from my abusive parents was because of how badly I had humiliated Chris, and I knew that Chris would have flogged Deadbeat Joe if he dared try to talk to me again. After realizing this, I laughed so hard I almost pissed myself and I left the school's website. Currently, I am studying for an exam that will earn me certification in an aspect of designing which is important for the field I want to get into. I am taking my education seriously, and I now have opportunities that I wouldn't have been afforded had I stayed at Chris' house. I have made some new friends and have now moved on from the things that my parents did to me. Next one is titled, Still My Girlfriend? I'll catch you and frame you. I live with my girlfriend Karen and my old grade school friend Jake, who was working as a sales rep. We live on the outskirts of a well-known city in the States. I was in my late 20s. I found myself looking for work as a bar I was working at closed down. Knowing I was desperate for work, Jake calls me and tells me his new girlfriend Jill just purchased a motel per bar with a small kitchen and she is after hired help. Needless to say, I jump at the opportunity as Karen wasn't working, the bills were piling up and our health insurance was due. I called Jill, arranged to meet her at her new property to introduce myself. Jake made the introductions in person and had already told Jill I was a hands-on DIY person with hospitality experience. Now to explain, my dad is sparky and believes if you can pay someone to fix something, you could probably do it cheaper yourself. He taught me lots and still does to this day. After a 30-minute chat, Jill tested me with a few odd jobs like rewiring an outlet, fixing a clogged sink, and quizzed me on liquor laws. Needless to say, I was hired that day. Originally, work was all about getting the property ready for business. Jill thought it would have been minor works, paint, replacement of fixings and furniture. We soon found out the electrical wires were shot, the whole place needed rewiring, which was a cause of stress for Jill as it would have blown her budget. Lucky for Jill, my dad was between contracts and offered his services using leftover stock already paid for from other jobs. Jill would need to cover the cost of any new product required. As for labor, his payment, he said he enjoys a steak and beer on Friday nights. After 3 weeks of helping Dad, the wiring was done, was up to code and at a fraction of the cost. Jill and I spent 1 to 2 months painting all 15 motel rooms, bistro, bar, cleaning the kitchen, cool rooms, etc. Jake would offer to help but always left after 20 minutes saying he has to make a sale. Jill often worked well into the night. After all, this was her dream. I'd take some furniture home to restore after hours and return it once restored. Business opened up after 6 months, and thanks to Dad, opened under budget. Jill managed the business and ran the kitchen. I worked where I was needed. In the kitchen, on the bar, tending to maintenance. I was on salary, second in charge, and could work in any position. Things went smoothly for a year. Business was turning a profit. Dad was getting his weekly beer and steak. Karen seemed happy. Jake was still working as a sales rep for a pharmaceutical company. One day I felt crook at work, so I clocked off and went home early. Pulling into my driveway, with the exception of a turning gut, things felt normal. Jake's car was there, but he lived there, so I didn't think anything was wrong. As usual, I parked behind Jake, important for later. When I opened the door, I found Karen doing the reverse cowgirl with Jake on the couch. After seeing me, Jake grabbed his pants and ran out through the back door. Karen and I argued into the night. She tried blaming me, saying I'm never home, I'm spending too much time with Jill. We were keeping things professional, I was her employee. I went to bed and told her she can sleep in Jake's bed as she clearly finds it more comfortable. I called Jill and informed her of this as Jake was her boyfriend. She was upset as he cheated on her but admitted she suspected he was seeing someone else. Jill offered me a room at the motel until I figure out my next move. The next day I loaded my personal effects in the truck. Jake's car was still there as I had blocked it in. I told Karen she can keep the rental and the furniture. I said Karen I'd be back for my tools in a few hours and I would appreciate if she wasn't there. I went home that afternoon to load my tools into my truck. While I was grabbing something from under my workbench, I found a bag I wasn't familiar with. Upon closer inspection, I found a large number of little tablets. The way they were packed and hidden made me realize they were probably for selling. A thorough search of the house led to me finding 2 more bags and about $12,000 in cash. I put 2 and 2 together and realized that Jake's pharmaceutical sales job was code for drug dealer, and Jake probably traded pills to Karen for naughty fun time. I was beyond angry until I realized that I have all I need to get him back. The revenge. Jake's car still hadn't moved. I went inside and grabbed his spare keys, chucked on a pair of gloves that were in the garage. I put half the money and 1 bag of drugs in his boot and thought, hang on, this won't pass. I removed his spare tire from the wheel well and put the bag in there. The other 2 bags, I threw them down the storm drain in the laneway behind my house. As for the $6,000 cash, Jake did cost me a house full of furniture. Just saying. I sent a message to both Jake and Karen with the typical hurt script. I can't believe you did this, we were friends, blah blah blah. I've left, I hope you two are happy together. I then made an anonymous tip to the local police and ATF about a man fitting Jake's description, loading what looks like drugs into the boot of a car that sounded Jake's car and provided a partial number plate number that matched Jake's car. It didn't take long for law enforcement to find the car and locate the drugs. What I wasn't counting on is Karen was driving the car at the time. She was later released when they found out she was driving the wrong car at the wrong time. A warrant went out for Jake's arrest. The icing on the cake, I found out later that not only was the police after Jake, but his supplier was also, as well as he lost a lot of product. Fast forward 3 months, I purchased a house. I was still working with Jill. Karen was pregnant with Jake's baby and he was on the run. I suspected she was keeping contact with Jake because she suddenly left the district when she was 8 months pregnant. 12 months after the incident, after a drunken night, Jill and I mixed business with pleasure and started dating. That was 10 years ago. We are married, have 2 children and just opened our 3rd business. Dad still gets his weekly steak and beer. I did hear a rumor that Jake and Karen wound up in Alaska but can't confirm this. I do feel a little bad about it now because Jake made it possible for me to date Jill and live a wonderful life. I do hope he is well. Next one is titled, "You say my work was insignificant and that we shouldn't expect rewards for just doing our job?" Bold move. At my workplace, there was an engineer who spent months learning about an old industrial control system that no one really knew how it worked anymore, while still doing his job responsibilities, e.g. maintenance and project management. This was done on his personal time and nobody asked him to do it. The ladder logic programming was just full of X0204, Y0512, D2085, L1100, F21, M3012, and etc., with no labels or documentation in the program explaining what those memory and I/O addresses did. Most of the paper documentation is missing or very out of date. For many programming situations, programmers can't write directly to the hardware memory as it is the compiler or the OS that decides where memory bits go. For programmable logic controllers (PLC), they are a different animal. The reason for those letters and numbers vomit is because the programmer has to pick which hardware memory and I/O addresses to directly use, and each letter was for a specific memory or I/O type. Things can go horribly wrong if you're just one number off. Ideally, there would have been comments and other documentation in the program that would explain how all of those bits, addresses are being used, but I'm assuming the reason why there weren't any was because they can use more memory than the logic itself, and the older PLCs don't support SD cards for expanded memory. After sufficient self-studying, he was able to safely make changes to the system to allow the production line to run faster, as that station was the bottleneck, and thus save money. No one else would do it because they were afraid of breaking a system that they didn't know how it worked. His manager denied the saved company X amount of money bonus on the basis that engineers shouldn't be expecting bonuses for something that was part of their job and the improvement was insignificant. When he learned about the reasons for the manager's indifference via his supervisor, he shredded the documentation that he created. He later refused to help when the department needed to make changes to the old system again because there was a need for more strict quality control, and applied for work at another company. I'm not even sure if the manager was aware of the existence of the documentation, and I doubt the supervisor, who was also frustrated with the manager's decision, would mention about it. To this day, progress with that old system has been very slow for some reason. What probably didn't help was that all of the assigned project members have other responsibilities, projects to handle, and those are generally easier than the old system's mess. Edit, maybe that coworker could have offered to come back as a consultant who just happened to know a lot about the old system, and then charge the company an hourly rate to recreate the documentation before even starting the second modification work. Last one is titled, "Sticky Car Interior." This happened in high school. I was hanging out with few friends on a Saturday night during the summer, and all of us decided to go get a Slurpee from a nearby convenience store. It was close enough that we decided to walk to the store to grab our said Slurpees and other goodies. We got to the store, I grabbed an extra large Slurpee, pay for it, and walked out happy and content. On our way back about halfway, we see this 80-ish blue shitty Oldsmobile type car with a surfer looking dude, blonde long shaggy hair, as a driver and 2 other girls in the car. They initially drove past us yelling some obscenities to which none of us could comprehend. We kept walking thinking nothing of it as we dismissed it as a harmless drive-by joke. But then we see the car making a U-turn and started driving towards us. As they get closer, the two girls popped out of the window and started throwing water balloons at us. Thankfully, with their genius timing and arm strength, none of them reached anywhere close to us. Like, not even halfway. Anyways, they drove past us with no success. We see them make another U-turn and decided to try on their sad attempt of water ballooning us again. They failed again, of course. But then these idiots decided to come back for the third time as I see the car making another U-turn. The audacity of these people. At this point, we are a couple houses away from home, and I'm beyond annoyed that these guys wouldn't give it up and had the audacity to come back for the third time. Give it up already. So what do? As the car got closer, I grabbed my barely touched extra large Slurpee and I threw it at the car as hard as I could just as they were driving by. Now my original intention was just to hit the exterior of the car, make a big splash, and them having to go get a car wash the day after. But because these morons were about to throw their third set of water balloons at us at a lot closer distance given their previous failed attempts, they had their windows fully open as I threw the Slurpee and ended up smoking the driver square in the face. Guys, if you were to picture a Slurpee grenade going off inside the car, this was it. I have never seen a Slurpee cup explode so perfectly and blessed them with my delicious orange Fanta, cherry Coke, and blue Gatorade everywhere inside their car. We're talking full coverage of the front windshield, all over driver and passenger seat, and some residual love in the back seat as well. Witnessing what just happened in disbelief, we quickly ran to the back alley of the house to lose them and snuck inside the house from the backyard. Once we settled inside, we peeked out the window and saw the same car driving by for over half an hour before they finally gave up. What a sweet moment of justice that was. P.S. I'm sure those old vehicles had some sort of suede-type material interior. Or heavily carpeted interior. Either or, I hope they had fun cleaning the car. Thanks for listening.